Hello, my name is Michael, and this is Bore Me to Sleep, the series dedicated to helping people sleep. More specifically, this video will lull you to sleep by boring you with unintelligible nonsense. For this episode, I'll be using vocabulary and sentence structure that vaguely emulates a lecture on music theory. If you find music theory boring, then this video is for you. If you really enjoy music theory, I would actually suggest listening to a different episode with a topic you have a harder time paying attention to. I've used machine learning to generate a monologue that doesn't make much sense in order to provide you the same comfort as falling asleep in a lecture. Please don't try to understand the script. Many people enjoy falling asleep to videos like this, but some can't as the material is too interesting. The words I say will vaguely pertain to the subject, but will be fragmented enough where a meaning can't be found. The effect created is a boring lecture where you can't understand or pay attention even if you wanted to. Therefore, I suggest you get comfortable and try to sleep. Let the words wash over you, and let your mind drift. If this video helps you do that, please consider supporting. Liking, sharing, and subscribing help these episodes reach other people that need them. By the way, Bore Me to Sleep is ever evolving, and I'm continuing to dial in my delivery, cadence, and overall sound. I tried to make myself sound more boring this episode, so let me know what you think. Ultimately, this project is for you, so your feedback is hugely appreciated and will be used for continuous improvement. For those who feel background music is a little too distracting, I invite you to listen to the standard version. It features my voice without any additions. I will now begin the lecture, so please enjoy and sleep well. The minor intervals of G minor third in the different key, therefore, we also view millimeters. The use of M2 where it creates the most stable arrival that the first is a dissonant passing tone in M13, the bass. F is maintained in the inversion mode. The G, which is not the dissonant thirds it creates, a D2 plus 4. We will seek this piece is in G major minor and minor in a major. 1.11 are not a weak to the I6. It is a third, IB, and a third away. The enharmonic reinterpretation of the major triad, SD minor, the sixth is identical to its inversions. In example B, sonata, presents a simple plan for the possible pivot chords. We have seen that chromatic sequences are not often in common practice music. They do not always tonicize V and D, example 1, but like where the first pitch classes is at the first inversion, for example, in example 24, illustrates the Chopin fourth and minor third. The octave fifth are consonant with common tone, and which is the second chromatic neighbor chord, to create an augmented sixth chord. As a result, example 22, 5 shows the descending root position harmonic seventh of A plus M3 and its chromatic passing tones. Incomplete neighbor tones can be used in an inversion well with chromatic tones. This motion is shown in example 6.4. The leading tone in M5 is through a subordinate composers from right A of VI6, to which shows both the tonic for the dominant function. For the first part of binary form, 1-3 in the first is part of a structural cadence. In this section, the harmonic structure is very contrasting. In the digression, the exposition composers often bring in a form diagram. In this case, the part of which is suspended over the V7 in the second chord, since the IV6 chord is in the end of M1. This frequently in the four measures in Chopin, Etude 6. The written for a 2 chord of example 11.18 in example 12 4.18, the major mode to VI major, the supertonic. The most common upper voice has 7 a second part, variation that I in a major will be used as a minor third or as a predominant seventh. The way that M is strongly in M, 8, with an ending, that measure does not only one another to another. Write examples, the following on a smooth bass or most often, because example voice is a hemiola. Hemiola moves by a there may be, especially the first phrase. For example, we learned that move in both a minor and then resolve that these scales degrees numbers. In cases, the enharmonic reinterpretation of which appears to the dominant. In a piece, the previous tonal area is the most of binary form. The form elision and modulation for the piece. The suspension 5 is suspended, and the dissonance that the soprano S bass is harmonized. The second begins with the inner voice up. The same upper voice creates a cross relation below the bass. In second, it might be the most important use of the listener, its use of Brahms. Such accents are not major, strong, and they do begin on any other part of the first chord, in M8. The line prepares the G, then leads to the chord in M3, which can be rendered as descending bass, its common tone, with the bass passing tones, and the stepwise V chord, that this G major third contains another of the major mode related key. This is also not goal-directed. The root, which the augmented sixth chord, a mixture chord, with F minor, and the most common type of this chord, is transitional to the parallel uninterrupted motion. First phrase, as part A descending passing tone in the B, the 5 in the minor chord, that the other chord is a common tone of a predominant, and in major or away to C to F minor. The falling a fifth descent between the D and a 4 on 3. In M3, it is established as a descent, which is the common for chords, so, and resolved to each applied chord A, the augmented sixth chord may appear of an augmented triad, then a tune, an A-B, behaves as complete the V chord, which leads to V in the tonic. A minor triad is often more, but because of the dominant, where it has strong symmetrical, and its harmonic form tonal structure is often longer, measures to C, example 11.10. Beethoven Symphony No. 4 in C major, 21, finale accented, and tonization of each measure 1 beat of tonal area is not the division of the cell. The key coda tension in its name from C minor to D minor is shown in example 19.4, example 4. 13, Mozart, Symphony No. 4, in C major, 21, finale B. Haydn Piano Sonata, in D major, Hop 4, Menuetto D. Beethoven, Symphony No. Scherzo, Chapter 13, the predominant function and the phase model example. 9.13, mixture of applied dominant chords to the common practice tonal. Consider the two-part of the contrapuntal Mozart Piano Sonata is clearly from MM12, a Schubert Piano Sonata 20 No. 3, Adagio ma non troppo, just as the tonic and the dominant functions may be extended, tonization substitute, but example 4.8 is possible in example 10.6. Expanding the predominant function by contrast, the augmented chords, it is dissonant as the root of the chord. In major, the most often occurs in their existing key form, usually the following cadential 6/4. The first inversion of the M2 and A if it immediately signals an arrival in the key of a minor. The major harmony in major mode in this chapter is followed by the scale step, on which are an E5, the direction of the soprano. The last chord is a dissonant passing tone with the chord. The tonic of the tonic, the dominant, the second tonal expansion of the seventh, which was a more angular and chromatic sequence. Composers often employ to these new tonal music is in binary forms, but it is the same for the section. The opening of a major material that closes the piece. In a key, the first theme of M, 1, 2, and 16 closes with an eighth note for the soprano. Further, these skips as well, especially between the carefully, the contour, and there is no longer the key of the piece. The tonic of the chord is sustained, one and it, only in the vocal line, also called the tonic. And submediant, this is not also the goal-directed motion to the new key of the dominant. Listen to example 2.13 and VI 6. Chords are no major 3 of chromatic sequences. In example 6.7, Schubert Piano Sonata in major allegro malta, although Brahms were, and sonatas, in this exercise, the Alberti bass, which are necessary in example 1, or the intervals in each case, 1, an added seventh is metrically weak to the chord, which the seventh and chords. The root is often support of the musical event. They are subordinate accented, for you are more dramatic more than those that music in those whose main types of these harmonic, both the upper and the bass, S bass, return to 5. The opening tune begins with a dissonant chord G, as if it can be heard as an although its work in which pitches is the most folk music written, and rather to 19th century composers used the roll in D major and its mixture functions, often due to the following consonant with progressions. For note that the designation voice example 3.1916, Schubert, string quartet in a minor, number 6. For example, the two excerpts seem not only are at the point, as of they with V and meter of a pitch or in the right hand, are called the emphasis on a first phrase, or an just a 4-measure may or may melodic design, called harmonic. The listener, which not became in the late 19th century, and the piece. We are highly contrasting thematic, most important, which is not only in the sparse hand's fifth descent, in the bass to last one of a dominant harmony, from the first section arises from a series of both breadth, that is the diminished seventh chord in dominant, and resolve to IV6, when A as chord and ascending fifth, we call the bass motion. It is a handy way for our analysis to describe this structure, in which given the sequence are elaborated in an example of chapter 13. The predominant refines the phrase model. We have seen how musical events, and includes just multiple, of former sections of the piece. And so in this section, it is possible to think that keys as an altered of its minor, in order to show that the ascending fifth's progression, melodic motion as part of an authentic cadence, is a voice exchange between I and 6 and 7, is only dissonant intervals are used by an octave, such as dissonant chords, and the new pitch most often are called a large scale A2 3+6. See that a third motion leads to a half cadence. In M8, the acceleration of harmonic includes three functions of the tonic: the predominant harmony, which can the space between the pitches, and the pitches in the minor mode, which are also cadential 6, 7, and B as a 4, which are the large scale degree that were used to be the mere root rather than a tonic chord, and then, with a deceptive motion, while A also neighboring VI in M2, how is it given the melody of the pitches now we also occur on the melody in M3, an octave chord on the downbeat? When an inversion, since both the A and that moves from the dominant I in a minor, each A given that Mozart's written in A major, is followed by a section to use transitions and retransitions participate in B. See example 12.15. The keys of V usually appear as an accent on the 7th chord, sometimes as 3 of the chordal 7th. In root position, V is prepared by common tone, which the 6th on a weak consonant leaps are consonant, since it metrically accented and are members of the underlying harmony's beat. We can usually use 2 of M, and the pitch of M8-5 is one chord, but this is given the dominant S form. But what is of the phrase model? We will encounter two reasons that composers can be extended into types of PD in Sonata S. This is a cadential 6/4 phrase and closes the tonic. The musical model of the model is symmetrical because it may be used in our chapters. The submediant, the diatonic forms of the minor triad is the diminished triad, and the result is not only 7 root position harmonies of the dominant. In example 9.9, our new VI chord, which is common to I, use of fifths. First inversion chords can occur more diatonic, and in example 2, listen to example 13.7, the dramatic deceptive motion in M4 is followed by a return to the tonic in M2. The dominant, which is important 2 pitches, that 2 phrases that share a single tonic by closing a given 3 stages, a tune, and the ultimately figure into the texture. The following 3 ordered harmonic chromatically move from I6 to VI, expanding it to 2 to the dominant of the tonic. For examples, the important cadential 6/4 chords, although A within the half cadence is this applied chord that leads to 2 in the key of a Mozart's piano sonata in D major, 2 number 7, Allegro B, Schumann piano sonata in B major, 2 number 3, trio. An important predominant 7th is to chord a more dissonant chords, so 2 would move to V or to V. There is no of many ways. Many composers applied chords in the first phrase. That first phrase, the second phrase, is called a descending fifths, in a phrase to which a way can move from an underlying V or begin in contrary motion. In this case, we can understand the Gin M, an example of the ACE major. Example 11.11, Beethoven Violin Sonata in Minor 1, number 4, Presto Adagio, the supertonic. The supertonic is the most common for other labels. there it were to be more than a chord, given its violin, whereas the seventh of M, 11 with 4 in M3 to 3, the tonic by the V of the tonic. In the new key, 1 of A, when you may opt to move I in minor and V in A Beethoven, example 22.2, we are several of the analysis of the example. The first predominant harmony may shown in the cadential part. The leaps in a half step from MM 53 that appears a 4/5 in MM 16 and the arrival of the second phrase. Although that both the cadential 6/4 and augmented sixth chords, which functions as possible, as analyzed the following applied. Models example 9.9 Mozart Piano Sonata in D major, and Dante if two phrases have a weak strong repetition relationship. The retransition that closes in M, a conclusive section in M2. In example 611, the IV in major to VI moves to 4 or raised, and tonization are common in the port rondo form. The form 3 or 7 part, Beethoven again invokes the tonic expansion. Given the pitch B, the rises toe, it returns to the D5. Finally, so that will sound like the bass, this line descends to is created by the chord's tone on F, resulting in the same chord. In the lower neighbor, a major triad is a weak or triad built on the perfect fifth. Example 8 shows common types of augmented sixth chords. The augmented sixth, the progression IV-V in major, is the dominant in this progression by a major. Begin the progressions in M 913 in D minor, in M16. A short score and trio provide 4 2 measure, the phrases in the first section, first or even the most of the original musical analysis to the 19th century, and harmonic motions, which the of symmetry chromatically from the tonic to 2. In the major mode, that the tonic chord is shown in the example 12, where I is metrically 3 and accented, since the metrically accented beat, and the 5 is followed by fifth. In example 18, the tonic is prolonged by the chord 3. Indeed, the half cadence, this chord is a first inversion, a dissonant of the diatonic chord, with an applied chord. In minor mode, the chord in the soprano voice has accompanied by a very new striking circle, which appears as the octave. The second D5 and the harmony in general, a weak beat note that is followed by the second, but 2 in the rondo are members of tonic and dominant functions, and they are in example 8.1. The cadential 6/4 chord is also prolonged example of the original key. Notice the 2 voice leading harmonic changes over a phrase. The excerpt is added to tonic with the dominant 7th. Note the chord of IV7 moves with a resolution to D. It creates a consonant with I in the bass to the soprano falls by the step. If the tenor voice is a third of the 6th, which are filled with step, and voices of the same chords as the move from the chord to 7, the chord must be lowered in the keys of the bass rather than its inversions of half step and 7, often follow to the dominant falls to G, B, and F as the phrase C, G, F, E. They all have to be aware of that are 3 part of a within a larger arpeggiation called the 5th, and by the half-step motion from I to the V of the neighbor, shown in the connecting measure, and notice that the neighbor is a last chord is A and is a string major triad in M36, with a falling chromatic third between D, Haydn, string quartet in D major, 64 number 2 Hob 3, Adagio ma non troppo, just as the tonic and the second important may be two or harmonic. The first phrase contains subphrases and other units of the tonic triad to I, and if it creates a major triad, by contrast, or a true chord as shown in example 8, in the bass I chord from the I to I in the soprano. Example 9.19, Structural Analysis. Predominant chords, the dominant arrives in the second final area in A, major I. Example 22.11, and its triads are repeated in M3. The listener will be clear by a two-voice melody, given that the alto and pitch are usually, but in the left-hand notes, one beat with the other quarter note, and therefore with the 4 of 3, the fifth, which a diatonic fifth, if the tenor are the root of the diminished seventh chord from IV to II in the bass in example 24.9, the soprano descent bass is harmonic motion in MM. Where the leading tone for G, the chord is complete, since we will write two first inversion as two chord, that the harmony progression is already IV. Allegro through the piece is as the dominant two complex, alters the listener's drama with the other of its registers is called A. The major sixth is within millimeters, then falls to C4 in order to I. This is only the II is a root position triad. Note the figure for a first chord that is a root position triad is in the tonic. The tendency tone is 7, and 2 of another as 4. Thus, the second contrasting which passing tones is subordinate to the surrounding chords and subdominant chords. The predominant can be to write the dominant in closed position. This chord is a diminished seventh chord, and applied, rather than a pedal. This event is an exact of a passing harmony that resolves to a large-scale neighbor tone in the bass. One exception to the rule that leading is common tone, like a C major, in the bass. Therefore, we label since an upper neighbor pitch with a neighbor note. Such durational G major and major in the same key. We also used the third major within the model and a voice leading chord. The tenor bass is a leap with a minor sixth chord, which is an applied chord, which are in example 8.3 as the chromatic descent bass note that appears in the measure. The pitches that the harmony first is not only contains another, but the ascending line moves on C, strongly on the word of MM1 and 4. After the cello line in M3, we also consider the first function in M1 at the passage, yet composers use to write formal sections in your model. Listen to each of the pieces. For example, 19.1 from D to E is a major triad. The third of the fifth is called a dissonant fifth of the tonic. Further, A also presents the pack of two tonal phrases. We also hear an extended pivot chord in a neighboring process. These are not only when they are used. Providing a color contrast to the form and its closely related chords is possible. The usual analysis of melody principles may be heard. In our chromatic fragment A, VI is the dominant of it. This is the two dominant The 3 chord appears in M2 is an extended chord that is an interrupted triad that leads to 6/5 but then leads to the dominant of the dominant. We have C minor and write a pattern with its Roman numeral analysis. Again, at this section, the pivot functions are as applied dominant chord in the first or a minor. Choose 2, the applied dominant harmony, but in the final structural of the variation IV, G5, the soprano prepares the bass, moves from 5 to 4. Examples of example 12.2, which is contrapuntal, and tessiturous, 3 major triads in root position, in 3 distinct exercise 3 or a minor triad against a dominant I. The dominant of the tonic, the single underlying harmonic progression tonic over dominant scale, the tonic and the following VJ chord progressions. There are less common reasons why composers use the second of diatonic applied. The submediant and diatonic tonal processes are to common practice. The way of can be alternating sevenths can have studied it as the seventh as V and V, and as it enters M5, the descent is the chord in M6 and VI chord appears in the bass. The soprano and alto move on the alto and bass in the treble staff and each of Chopin counterpoint. Sonorities are used. This example of these 2 voices in example 6.10 demonstrates the dominant of the chromatic sequences. Beethoven in example 20.8 illustrates the most common qualities of chords occur in major and when a major triad is a diminished sonority, rather than the descending thirds in M13 and the harmonic structure continuous in the digression. From the 4 movement of Mozart and piano sonata written, notice how the neighbor tone of 7 of the bass voice with its own as a soprano voice exchange often results in a chromatic voice exchange. Finally, VI create a chord in the bass and a half repetition or at a second level to a phrase. This passage is also a tonal motion that leads to the tonic. The complete tonic returns in the next chapter 18 and dominant the predominant functions. The phrase, which begins in arpeggiation of D major, exactly how the V of the G minor chord. The alto and move to the final chord are all of the chordal V, VI, does the dominant. In M7, how does not move to the dominant lead from to dominant. Finally, the phrase to the structure of the movement, this time and tonal ambiguity functions, with both applied chord and to be inverted. The diminished 7th chord occurs more often than the dominant as a common tone, following other than in other, and a major in their bass. These chords are not contain such an harmonic reinterpretation, and labeled the second is, in example, the modulation tonic in the cadential 6/4 steps. With Roman numeral harmonic analysis is necessary between each of each scale degree. We will first study that is a second phrase 10, the second tonal motion, which functions as dominant, and dominant harmonies, and there are 2 main types of chromaticism. The second chord is first inversion and the root, the Roman numeral, and the major triad is used and applied chord. This bass is common in the applied dominant of the key IV or the common tone G, G of F, whose forms of the G minor, the listener begins in MM2 and restates the bass. In this, when adding an aria, the VI is that common to VI7 and its 7 parts in major keys. A minor chord of E minor, the sequence is strongly in the cadence, since the dominant chord and other 3 here, example 18 shows. that F major expands the dominant with a dominant to F minor in M3, in example 28.13, in root position, first inversion, and 2, can be part of an octave. Example 21.7, Haydn string, no, C major, 21 finale recognizing applied chords are, for example, if you write two sequences, including the pivot chord, and therefore that chord is a second that substitutes 6. This motion is heard in when a third voice, with the would expect to suspension in the bass. Because the leading tones may like an inversion, but rather the dissonant 7 are consonant by step and the octave, and the only if the fifth of all chords are chord, and thus we are harmonized VI as a temporary leading tone, as example 24 shows. The second method is also used with a diatonic harmony. These, both, and the chromatic forms are the same pitch bass note. In first to the upper voices in E, the sustained bass is to show the fifth, the tenor 6, 7, and 6, as the leading tone with chord tone. These two models are distinguished by the subdominant in example 19.1. Theme from Winterize in 4 voices. Realize the figured bass example 24. We explored several chromatic modulations from IV, although the predominant can also be expanded by V, and the phrase moves in M5. The line closes in M9, 12 is therefore. After the 16 of the two phrases of the transition returns in M8, finally the V chord that occurs first inversion first is prepared, and if the root is a voice leading tone, that the tonic harmony, which is the most stable, with the bass S tendency tone occurs. Since the missing in the chord in M1, in the left hand of Beethoven's tune, the movement is 2 binary forms. Discuss how the composer to focus on the dominant and lead black to dominant. Place is a passing chord that is chord, first to be the dominant triad S7 on a raised fifth. Since there are also no perfect fourths in the sequence is the pattern of every change of the cell. The surface of direction after the cadence of the cadential 6/4 chord appears on a bi-octave scale. In fact, this in G may be heard as the A, as the half cadence in M4, even though the altered seventh of the interval is most, creating the goal harmonic rhythm, which is more than subphrases. Second inversion triads contain an inversion triad, with its passing seventh chords. The common tone of the chord and dissonant with the seventh of the applied chord, which forms a common tone, is a passing tone, and the bass leaps in from I to V. The IV is clear in example 6.6. In this procedure, the bass is a soprano harmonic progression, although we can prolong the function of either through it by one neighboring motion to tonic. A half cadence is the first, because the dominant is even simple, that written at the entire development. Further, the minuet and trio are 3 measures of the material that follows 15 periods. The following diagram presents the given that the large-scale melodic and melodic material of the fifth plus tonic harmony, in example 13.13, that illustrates such a new chromatic ascent to create that is smooth bass that is often true to avoid upper voice. Further, our rule of harmonic changes the neighbor motive in example 25, which contains the predominant function, and there may be expanded, the 2 common tones, and therefore is a voice leading to avoid any other applied chord, when it is a voice leading to chord rather than an authentic cadence. In an example 11, it is more common chords in a 3 instance of the chord practice. The chord is doubled in the root position V7 chord. The 2 tendency tones must resolve to the tonic with an applied chord. We have encountered chromaticism, a transitional I chord in O major. E in this to the first phrase, which is called measures. The first phrase closes on a weak and harmonic rhythm, and again the Beethoven begins on I, B, A. The diagram, it is cast in rounded binary form. A is to think that a ternary form is A and cadence of that close. The closing section closes in the tonic on the S meter of the tonic, while the dominant as an enharmonic other harmonic leap. The cadence of tonic is more important than tonic and dominant. The phrase begins the same harmonic progression of the B major, which leads to the beginning of M9, and the performer to be filled with the fact that began the individual harmony. In order to use the minor Roman numeral or harmonic function within a half cadence, it is only a descending fourth, which is to be a second phrase. Notice that this changing root of the tonic chord is not to create a dominant chord. Such labeling and following applied dominant. Example 18.16, part from C major piano sonata, in the violins is strongly to a more phrase model. There is often a way to written out of the larger musical space that was between the entire 19th century. The piece begins in the tonic example, 19.11, Haydn String Quartet in C major 28, menuetto, complete the bass voice, leading in major keys. I in D minor in A minor, we used seventh chords to let choose a good sixth to the diatonic collection of example 13. Note that the soprano and alto are 9 the tenor and in the soprano voice, which might have seen that would begin a piece form a third period, a modulation from a single phrase with a transition-retransition, each theme and return to a tonic, the tonic in the same chords. We will see that two basses, type of both scales, and interval of minor third C in M5. The beginning, which then M, even C E in example 18, which the missing tonic is not stable, and of the large-scale melodic pattern of the minor mode. The chromatic tonal system, the submediant, major and chapter 9 tonic by descending and mediant. Listen to and then the soprano voice, the chromatic augmented sixth, such as a sense of underlying harmonic motion that we can't hear an extended chord to the chordal third in M5. F moves to function, as it on the half cadence. We also expect a passing tone, the bass, given that the chord in this chord is a doubled third above the bass. The result is softened when all forms of pitches in the minor, a major-minor scales sequential progression, may have just a major and subdominant, or it is C major and minor. In example 30.10, chromatic steps demonstrates that diminished seventh chords. A 2-4 with a leading tone G, 2, and 3 is also possible in the harmonic change. It is an accented and part of a new texture. Because these 5 variations, the second is not nearly as the half cadence, but moves to D of V in M18, and a section returned to the tonic in the recapitulation. This is nearly the same large sections form. Trio is to explore the transition. Rondo form a variety of part rondo, and classical composers often the formal sections. The 19th century, the harmonic and the harmonic symmetry of 2 and V chords. On a Bach, Flute Sonata No. 3, in B1 rondo as the E major. Note that the first single chord of each of the models, I and the Roman, is diatonic. Their composers often in both PTA and STA. The half cadence in M8, in each progression G F minor, A major, the progression is E major, G, and then 0 in M2, is harmonized by an applied cadential sixth chord in the first phrase, and contains a weak beat 3. the A of a neighbor D, the downbeat will only fill in label the interval of the following sequences: a repetition of the transformation of figured bass and direct bass. By step creates a third identical to the soprano by using a fifth. The result from chord in the upper voice from the chord of the chord, which is the fifth. For example, from the VI moves to PD in a different context, as shown in example 12.17. As a modulation, you will still analyze using a sense of ambiguity the applied dominant function that leads to the dominant in the key of the minor, in the new key, the A minor, the major mode to the dominant, major 3. This progression is followed by a fifth major as a dominant and returns to B, the arrival of the opening on a movement Beethoven. Fourth Piano Sonata, example 19.4, Allegro contains two subphrases. The pivot chords are pivoting, a voice leading tone between the chord and the dominant function, that the root 5, 6, and 1. The 4S is the 4 chord of the chords. In example 8, the Corelli Sonata has been labeled a powerful way that helps to the dissonance. Example 24.7 illustrates two parts of the same pivot chord to all parallel continuous tonal areas, as it was to be given as its I, and to V is F major. In a major chord progression, 3 is to 3 in the V of A. In example 21, it functions as a minor chord because no rhythmic minor, and the keys do not have a third or away from the tonic. But it still later begins in M, contrapuntal expansions of tonic and the subdominant. We also used in a new key to create a tonic. Any chromatic harmony is a voice exchange. Motion that together then return it to the tonic or function in MM13. We also a neighboring function simply placed to create a harmony that occurs in the entire measure of measures. See example 19.7. The first measure, as in M1, moves to a predominant to use to the IV. It may not function as a PD chord. And then add the following applied chords, and those in example 17.5, with a strong cadence of I, harmony in the major mode. It had the return to its key, then a cadence of C minor. We call this example is an underlying harmonic progression. Tonal motion in which each way to move through the upper voice, example 29.4, expanding tonic with a subdominant seventh, which are IV, and that the V chord are the pitch of the pitches. Within example SA, the development and its return in M3 is one large leap, that the second authentic cadence to tonal half step 5, but not phrase ending example 17. In example 17, we view the third and type of counterpoint the following examples. 6 perfect intervals can be used in minor and the same chord sequence. Because the chromatic minor mode works well in the way of the form, the bass motive, because variation moves 2 in a close position, is not only to view the home second section. This is because the opening is the same time and arrival that the S key. Indeed, the tonic chord section is a result of retransition. The major dominant F major, whose seventh, rather a climax, is the large part of a rondo, the variety of symmetry and return. The development begins after the beginning of the second phrase marks to piece, that the piece is integral to the refrain and thus it is in the initial major, which is a piece of the upcoming motion to the B major, the progression in which enters B harmonized as a bass note bass is followed by the descending broken chord. The sequence in example 18. The chromatic bass arpeggiation I, which indicates first inversion and only creates a seventh chord. The chord is doubled in a chord tone, and a diminished seventh above A, given the bass leaps of the soprano voice moves, example 2.19, adding a fifth. The suspension S descent is called a second, with the first chord presents an outgrowth of which the V is the fifth of V7 and a third. The bass is shown in example 9.10, in which Mozart counterpoints the piano sonata E major, D major, 1, the resulting voice leading tone, and the final A enters on the next beat of the measure. This same situation is there are C major, IV becomes IV. The supertonic end is A. For the case, it has the structural tonal structure of tonal music and the following periods. The harmonic pattern is repeated, and as in the right hand cell, are also a traditional goal. Given the key in example 24, the only in which the final section transposed, the development of the second section is the tonic triad. The minor 3 does not for the first inversion or it. Beethoven intensifies the same drama with the tonic by reversing the bass arpeggiation I and IV6. Notice that the F lead to tonic in M7. Notice how there are only F is metrically weak, root position. The sequence will move two voice leading from one as dominant, and while either the bass are not. Since the alto F is immediately resolved, a functional V chord is a common one. Rather than the chord VI, V is more like in minor mode not. Composers tonicize I and VI. Notice that the songs are related chords, and the voice example are often in example 1. But the final upper neighbor is a root position triad on the tonic, and ending on the tonic, the presence of harmonic sections. The intervals are especially in A minor, but moves in the same direction. Example 11.11 demonstrates an underlying diatonic chord in which applies chord is IV. Note that the upper voices move to the simple voice, moving at different directions as example 3.15, which shows the bass characterizes appears to be an example of the applied chord B, M.24. We call this melodic seventh chord, I. We now see the descending third of the sequence. You may even, in the late 18th century for our composers, is the common to PD and dominant harmonies to be a half cadence. The three-part is cadential dominant in M8, is that the chord that closes on a minor key in M minor, if the opening measures is more than a dominant, which does it moves in F major, while IV6 in contrary motion, A which movement, is transposed by AI chord that leads to V. We have seen how Beethoven 1 is also often made in the upper neighbors of the bass, neighboring V in the soprano. In example 11.4, the IV triads in example 5.11 are taken from most of the harmonic and cello, repeating bass and bass. Notice that the songs are linked not only by their large-scale dominant tonic, with the tonic or the second as a given, only the second level analysis of the expert. We also identify the accented passing tones, simply as accented neighbor, given that forms from the other beat, embellishing tones, not as A accented between tones, between such as unaccented passing and accented embellishing tones. Finally, composers such as A, use chromatic modulations are often, for example, 7, 6, and 5 is 4 in the soprano. Example 8, 12 presents two examples of the more dramatic pattern. Measures contain two same harmonic changes. Form a phrase, usually containing a strong tonic, because I0 usually moves to tonic. The tonic in M, example 20, note, problematic another chromatic harmony. 19 contains a parallel minor third. But the root of the chord is the root position of a dominant, and the tendency tones as a neighbor to avoid the M10. In example 2.3, you probably heard in first inversion of a minor key. This sonority example can be related to minor keys, where either or two, or it forms a neighbor tone. Other neighbors to F4 pitches are generally they are an important notes and that they have already in the bass notes and are members, as it is an accent, as a pivot that the progression for the first sounds like the V chord, and M. It rises to a fifth with the leading tone that the seventh, the augmented sixth chord, and resolve by falling to a seventh to a sixth. As the chord creates a neighboring chord between the IV6 and outer voice is a voice exchange between the tonic, that the submediant and the VI is also V7. In the example 18.2 represents the soprano pitch of its seventh to sixth as a voice leading tone in the step progression in the harmonic harmony. The subdominant is a root of the applied chord. It forms a root by major and G. This shows the harmonic motion in the key of its higher register. The entire rhythmic swapping, a single cadence occurs in the first phrase with the pack of VI and IV, by which creates a progression in the second cadence, which does the pivot 6/4 in the new key, in which the return to a major model. This is often accomplished simply by an overlapping and an accent created by one accent, which is repeated notes or two or more different gestures. The three sections are many to be 3 beats, and each of which is written above the CF, example 10. Begin to label the key, and mediant. We can double VI in the new key. The diatonic sequence is added to avoid parallels by moving from the preceding leading tone, which to I and 3 in F is the HC, while other than the tonic chord is a passing chord, and in M12, the new voice motion in both the final example as Mozart. Interval of a sixth, a fifth using different third, whereas it contains a chordal fifth and the fifth. Voice leading tone or an upper neighbor, you are two common qualities of the form. It is one half of it, A that B, that we distinguished at the underlying A cadence in the first and measure. The three ordered harmonic structures are presented by and through the descending broken chord and the seventh. In order to use the VI chord, the following soprano falls in example 12.2. It also is the type of underlying 2 that moves to both tonic and dominant. In first inversion, you must resolve to a weak beat, and that closes the dominant with the downbeat of the tonic. For example, this excerpt closes on a new part, but the theme you may be in the left hand, and in variations. The chromatic entrance of C major should be in E major beginning A, in which the key could return to a tonic in M4. This is a seventh chord, which can move the V of the bass, is followed by a descending third, with a soprano that moves from I to I6 in the tonic dominant. In M6, it is as such that following consonant sixth and the inversion seventh chord. The passing tone is a second chord that leads to the B part of the A, C major triad in M18. The difference between the first section and its with the new key in M. It cannot be considered to the opening of this place. That could be quite striking in sonata form. In sonata form, presto appears between a single line that follows the bass, is added to the chromatic pitch. In the bass, both the passage begins with the left hand of the variation movement. In M4, it is the structure of MM2, that a HC in M2, although a strong cadence occurs in the first chord. The STA in B major, the second occurs in the first chord. The bass presents the contrapuntal voice of the bass, are broken. The reduction of various types are the various types of rondo form, yet the listener is no clear given melody in the bass notes, and two very additional voices, such as in textures as possible, to be as if the function you can continue and extended of its phrase. Listen to example 18.3. Note the passing finally in the bass, a passing tone, the second chord, will not all of the piano again. The voice 4 in MM2 and 3 is the accent of the soprano's voice exchange between bass and bass. The soprano and bass provide a clear outer voice counterpoint and inner voices at every chord. The following chords and this inversion are rather than all the phrases. This concludes the 1-hour lecture. By now, I hope you've fallen asleep. If not, you might consider playing another episode from this series, or simply replaying this one. Thank you for listening, and I hope you fall asleep soon.